everyone, I'm Graham Ledger, and welcome to the Daily Ledger. Our cover story, the pushback against the commander-in-chief who commands a failing, feckless foreign policy. Even the mainstream media is embarrassed by their boy. This as the majority of Americans reject the Obama degrade to defeat plan against the Islamic State, which clearly is not achieving its purported goal. A Reuters poll, 60% of Americans say the United States should do more to defeat the Islamic State. What's more, 52% say accepting so-called Syrian refugees will make this country less safe. So, what's Obama going to do? Change tactics? Employ a battle plan that actually might work? Or how about this? How about acquiesce to the will of a majority of we the people? Even the mainstream media would like to know.
ISIL claimed responsibility for the massacre, sending the message that they could not target civilians all over the world. The equation has clearly changed. Is it in time for your strategy to change?
A more than year-long bombing campaign in Iraq and in Syria has failed to contain the ambition and the ability of ISIS to launch attacks in the West. Have you underestimated their abilities, and will you widen the rules of engagement for U.S. forces to take more aggressive action?
If I could ask you to address your critics who say that your reluctance to enter another Middle East war and your preference of diplomacy over using the military makes the United States weaker and emboldens our enemies.
I think a lot of Americans have this frustration that they see that the United States has the greatest military in the world. It has the backing of nearly every other country in the world when it comes to taking on ISIS. And I guess the question is, and if you'll forgive the language, is why can't we take out these bastards?
Well, Jim, I just spent the last three questions answering that very question. So I don't know what more you want me to add.
So, the answer from Obama, in case the mainstream media doesn't get it, is tough. Obama will stay the ideological course, and he's not going to do what's best for this country, nor the right thing to do. He's going to stick to his fundamental transformation, period. But we can learn from Obama's blathering rhetoric and history-making mistakes and turn this cowering negative into a future national security positive. Joining me now from Houston, Texas, counter-terrorism expert and the president of Global Intel Strategies, James Conway. Jim, it's a simple question with probably a very complex answer. What are we doing wrong right now under this president regarding beating back and winning the war against radical Islam?
Well, good afternoon, Graham. You know, first of all, I think that we got to stop playing defense and we got to start playing offense. I mean, we need to step up. And, you know, the French, hard to believe we're saying the French are providing us an example of how to step up and meet this enemy head on. I think that's what we need to do and stop pussyfooting around in the United States, maybe trying to monitor the movement of radical and dangerous people that are walking around within our midst, and get out there and get tough. I mean, if people are on social media and they're talking to bad guys and they're fomenting violence and they're traveling to the battlefield, we ought to be taking them off the streets and treating them as enemy combatants. We are at war. I don't know if the policymakers and lawmakers in Washington know that, but ISIS has declared war against us, and I think we're in the battlefield. So we need to treat it as such, and we need to be more aggressive, more robust, and take this enemy on head on and stop playing defense and putting more Hercules teams on the streets and more magnetometers at football stadiums and all this other nonsense. We need to get aggressive if we're going to save American lives.
This is not rocket scientists either, because let's face it, wars have been fought since the history of mankind for thousands and thousands of years, and there are winning battle plans that we have executed in the past. Sure, this is a new enemy and a new paradigm. They don't have conventional methodologies, and they're not necessarily tethered to a particular state, so it's a little bit harder, but it's certainly one that we can achieve. And among, I think, the three things that we need to do right now, actually we should have done it probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, what have you, it doesn't matter, is that we need to, first of all, identify the enemy as radical Islam, no matter who wants to paint it with another broad brush? It is radical Islam. Number two, we need to declare war against radical Islam. There needs to be an official declaration of war. And number three, in my opinion, we need to define what victory looks like. Would you agree with those?
Yeah, and it's a gray area, Graham, because the military calls it asymmetrical warfare. It's not a nation state. It is a guerrilla group. It's a terrorist group that crosses multiple borders and walks amongst us, that wants to attack us. But this is a hard target, and we need to take everything out of the toolbox to fight this target. Here in the United States, FBI, the local police, the Joint Terrorism Task Forces have the point in conjunction with the intelligence community. And we need to pull everything out of our toolbox, and we need to be aggressive. I have a real concern in that we have sort of crossed a threshold in a bad sense, in as much as we're beginning to lose the capability to conduct electronic surveillance and monitor these bad guys. We've seen some indications of that with the Paris cell that conducted the attacks 3 days ago. It looks like they may have been communicating in an encrypted sense. And so for that reason, they may have flown under the radar of French intelligence and police services. That's what we're beginning to see. Electronic surveillance is a key part of tracking these bad guys, understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what their next step is. If we lose that, we are going to be behind the eight ball in many respects.
Okay, but if I were a Donald Trump, I would say to you, hey, if we bomb them to smithereens, then they're not going to have this infrastructure to go on Facebook and to encrypt these messages. But I want to go a step further and talk about the homeland. There's so many facets to national security on our soil, including a secure southern border and being very careful about these people who are overstaying their visas. 40% of illegal immigrants in this country are people who are overstaying their visas. Mm-hmm. But in World War II, we didn't go to Nazi Germany and say, hey, let's import some Nazis here to this country during the war and see what happens. When we are allowing refugees from Muslim cultures, I don't care, how politically you feel on this, it just rationally and from a battle perspective does not make sense to import potential terrorists to our soil.
Yeah, and again, going back to the concept of the toolbox, we need to put everything in play here, or Americans are going to die in the streets of this country, as we saw in Paris a couple of days ago. We need to take everything out of the toolbox, and if that means hardening the borders and creating a better system for monitoring those borders, whether it's physical surveillance, electronic surveillance, enforcing the law in terms of overstays, we need to do that. We need to take everything out of the toolbox. We are living in very, very dangerous times right now. There's no doubt about that.
And we can't be delusional about it. Otherwise, it is suicide of a culture by delusion, which is what we're doing right now. James, thank you. Coming up next, a reformed Islamic terrorist on how to tell a good Muslim from a bad Muslim. Also ahead, climate change BS, Bernie Sanders.
One of those responsibilities is to make sure that we leave future generations a planet that is healthy and habitable.